Hey. All right, so we're going to finish it up today. Then you'll be done with Heart of Darkness. Page 133. Take a look near the bottom, and this is when Marlowe gets back to Europe. And at first, he's disgusted by all the people because he's had all these experiences that these people know nothing about, right? We saw this with Ceremony with Tile when he came back, and he felt like he had all these things happen to him that no one else could understand, and it was affecting him negatively, and nobody could get it, right? Marlowe has a similar thing that nobody, because at this point, we turn of the century, it's not like there's internet or TV and anything. So the only way you could learn about other countries and other places or other continents is by visiting there yourself or hearing from people who visited. So when he comes back, he just doesn't think people are going to be able to get what he would need to tell them. I found myself back in the sepulchral city, resenting the sight of people hurrying through the streets to filch a little money from each other, to devour their infamous cookery, to gulp their unwholesome beer, and to dream their insignificant, silly dreams. They trespassed upon my thoughts. They were intruders whose knowledge of life was so to me an irritating presence, because I felt so sure that they could not possibly know the things that I knew. Their bearing, which was simply the bearing of commonplace individuals going about their business in the assurance of perfect safety, was offensive. I had no particular desire to enlighten them, but I had some difficulty in restraining myself from laughing in their faces so full of stupid importance. I dare say I was not very well at the time. Okay, going on. Now, so when Marlowe gets back, he's confronted by some people from the administration, and he wanted to find what Mr. Kurtz had to say, right? So he wanted any information from him, and that's when Kurtz gave Marlowe the letters and told Marlowe to keep them. He refuses to give them. He gave them the Suppression of Savage Customs report, and that was the one that was very beautifully written in all the elegant and ways that the company is going to be able to help people in Africa. And then at the bottom, he had scrawled "Exterminate the brutes," right? So we talked about whatever change took place in him was pretty negative, and went from wanting to supposedly help all these people, or at least tell the people in Europe that he was helping all these people, to wanting to kill all of them. Okay, going on 136. The visitor informed me Kurtz's proper sphere ought to have been on the politics on the popular side. But heavens, how that man could talk. And this is about Mr. Kurtz, and this is why Mr. Kurtz is so powerful, and this is why Marlowe wanted to hear him talk. Mr. Kurtz is described as a voice because his ability to speak can convince people and influence the way they think about things. He electrified large meetings. He had faith. Don't you see? He had the faith. He could get himself to believe anything. Anything. He would have been a splendid leader of an extreme party. What party? I asked. Any party, answered the other. He was an extremist. Okay, now going on. Then he goes and meets with the intended, and this is the very end of the book. Now, the intended is as clueless as the aunt, maybe even more so. She is completely still in love with Mr. Kurtz and still mourning him. And in the room, it's pretty dark, right? Because the things they're talking about are dark. The dusk was falling, um, and she comes in all in black with a pale head floating towards me in the dark. Now go to 140. At first, Marlowe doesn't lie to her, right? But he kind of gives her the impression on things. And also, she jumps in to answer the questions that she asks him frequently. So, for instance, "You knew him very well," she murmured, after a moment of morning silence. "Intimacy grows quickly out there. I knew him as well as it is possible for one man to know another." "And you admired him," she said. "It was impossible to know him and not admire him." "He was a remarkable man," I said unsteadily. And again, as I noted the other day, remarkable could be good, it could be bad, but it's kind of, this is a very carefully chosen word that Marlowe's using here. "You knew him best," I repeated, "and perhaps you did." "You were his friend," she repeated a little louder. "You must have been. If he had given you this and sent you to me, I feel I can speak to you. I must speak. I want you have heard his last words, to know that I've been worthy of him. It is not pride." Now, what she wants is to know what his last words were, right? Now, his last words, the horror, the horror. If Marlowe had told the intended that would make her feel terrible, because that implies that whatever happened to him when he died was really, really awful, right? Um, Um, so it said, no, on page 143, she goes on, "No, it is impossible that all this should be lost, that such a life should be sacrificed to leave nothing but sorrow. You know what vast plans he had? I knew of them too. I could not perhaps understand, but others knew of them. Something must remain. His words, at least, have not died. His words will remain. And his example," she whispered to herself, "men look up to him. His goodness shone in every act. His example, true, his example, too. I forgot it. Yes, his example. I forgot that." Now, again, she doesn't know what his example is. She doesn't know about the skulls on the post. She doesn't know about the queen. She doesn't know about any of that stuff. And so Marlowe at this point is kind of letting her think whatever she wants to think. Okay, on page 145, it goes on. To the very end, I heard his last words. I stopped in fright. Repeat them, she said in a heartbroken tone. I want something to live with. I was on the point of crying. Don't you hear them? The dusk was repeating them in a persistent whisper all around us, in the whisper that seemed to swell menacingly like the first whisper of a rising wind. The horror, the horror. Now, if you remember The Telltale Heart, that story by Edgar Allan Poe, and the guy kills the guy and buries him under the floorboards, and he keeps hearing the heart beating even though no one else can, I think there's a touch of that here going on with Marlowe. Anyway, his last word, to live with, she murmured. Don't you understand? I loved him. I loved him. I loved him. I pulled myself together and spoke slowly. The last word he pronounced was your name. I heard a light sigh, and then my heart stood still, stopped dead short by the exulting and terrible cry, by the cry of inconceivable triumph and unspeakable pain. I knew it. I was sure. She knew. She was sure. Now, why does he lie? Right? He's made a couple points in the book about how much he hates lies and detests lies, and it's like biting into rotten meat, all that stuff. Why does he lie here? And when he comes back to Europe, why doesn't he tell anyone else about what happened? Now, if whether you're writing a paper about whether the book is about being pro-colonialism, right, in favor of these practices, or by exposing it to ridicule and showing how ridiculous it is being anti-colonialist, you do need to explain why he doesn't tell anyone when he gets back and why he lies to the intended, right? You could say with the people in Europe, he just doesn't think they're going to be able to understand anyway, and he kind of gets into that. With the intended, it could just be sparing her. I mean, it doesn't really do any good to her to hear the truth, right? Because then she'd just be more miserable, and giving her this one little lie is not really the end of the world, but it still made Marlowe feel terrible. Anyway, the last page, on page 146, then we go back to the boat, right? So the boat in Europe that they're waiting for. But I could not tell her. It would have been too dark altogether. Marlowe ceased and sat apart, indistinct and silent, in the pose of a meditating Buddha, which brings us back to that imagery of Marlowe being Buddha-like and like a teacher we should trust. Nobody moved for a time. We've lost the first to the ebb, said the director. And so their water was coming in to get their boat out. I raised my head and seemed to lead into the heart of an immense darkness. Now, again, inconclusive experiences. He has these experiences, right? And he goes up on the Congo River on this boat, and he tells us about a lot of things that happened, but he never goes as far as to say what the European people are doing is cruel and terrible. He never goes too far as to call the people from Africa people. He says they're not inhuman and things like that. And most of the time, he does his best to ignore everything going on around him and just focus on surface things like driving the boat, right? Now, the next book you're going to read, Things Fall Apart, which you have been reading, is kind of the flip version of this story, right? And tomorrow, what I'm going to have you do, I've got a short essay from the author of Things Fall Apart, Chinua Achebe. This is a speech he gave about Heart of Darkness. It's a famous one, okay? So, and he thinks the book is thoroughly racist. So we'll talk about that, and I'm curious to hear your impressions on that. So that'll be for tomorrow, and then you will have several work days, right? So your Heart of Darkness essay is due on it is due on, I believe, April or May 4th. And I will have that on the calendar to be sure, but I think May 4th is the due date. So if you have any questions, please shoot me an email, and I will talk to you soon. Thank you.